When the earthquake hit, it didn't start with thunder. It started with a low growl that rolled beneath the floorboards, almost like the world had taken a breath. Cabinets crashed, windows shattered. The ground surged with a force so sudden, it felt like the earth itself had reared up in rage. But when it finally stopped, when the roaring gave way to silence, the real terror began. The kind of terror that doesn't come with noise or motion, but with stillness, deafening stillness. Da Cayenne lay beneath the collapsed remains of what had once been her kitchen. Dust choked the air. Light was gone. There was no up or down, just the crushing weight of concrete pressing down on her chest, pinning her to the floor like an afterthought. She didn't remember falling. 1 minute she was pouring tea, the next, she was here, her right arm numb, her legs twisted, her lips too dry to scream. Her ribs ached with every breath, but breathing meant she was still alive, and that felt like a curse. She tried to call out, just once. A thin, hoarse sound pushed from her throat, but it barely reached beyond the slab that held her down. No one answered. Her house, once filled with the quiet chaos of daily life, clinking plates, a creaky chair, the chirp of the radio, was now a tomb. She could feel the dust collecting in her throat, clogging her thoughts, her memories. Maybe this was how it ended, not with a final word or gesture, but with the silence that comes after everything else has broken. She tried to shift her arm, but pain lit up her shoulder like fire. She gritted her teeth, tried again. Nothing, just the dull, radiating throb of injury and helplessness. Her mind reached out, desperate for anything to cling to. Her granddaughter's drawing, that crayon picture she'd stuck to the fridge. It had flowers, a crooked sun, a dog with 3 legs, and the words "I love you" a foe. Was it still there, or had it crumpled into ash along with the rest of her small world? She imagined it hanging, defiantly, above the wreckage, a tiny monument to a life she might not return to. Time slowed. She couldn't tell if it had been minutes or hours. It felt like days. Her thoughts wandered because they had to. Because if they didn't, she'd have nothing but the weight, the dust, the silence. She thought of her neighbors, the old man across the lane who played the bamboo flute every morning, the boy who always raced his bicycle too fast down the hill, the smell of steaming mohinga wafting through open windows. Were they still alive? Had they been lucky enough to be outside when it hit? Or were they too, buried beneath their own memories? The silence stretched on. Her heartbeat thumped in her ears, slow and unsure, like it too was trying to decide whether to keep going. She prayed, whispered to a God who seemed just as distant as the sky above her. But the prayers stuck in her throat, caught behind the dust and the rising fear. She wanted to scream, to fight, but all she could do was lie there, crushed, forgotten, waiting for something, anything to shift. Her breathing grew shallow, her body tired. There's a kind of surrender that doesn't come from weakness, but from being worn down past the edge of fear. That's where she was. Her mind drifted to silence, not from peace, but from exhaustion. A resignation so quiet it barely felt like dying. And then scratching. At first it was faint, like something brushing against the rubble. Her ears perked, confused. Was it the debris shifting again? Another aftershock? But no, it was rhythmic, insistent. Not the groan of settling stone but the frantic scrape of something alive. Her heart skipped, then again, scratching, just near her shoulder. Her eyes widened in the dark. Was it rats? Some creature digging for a meal? Fear twisted in her gut. But then warmth. A flash of fur brushing against her cheek. A sudden sharp sniffing sound. Paws, digging, claws against stone. A dog. Her breath caught. Was she hallucinating? Had her mind finally cracked under the weight of it all? But then a noise, low and urgent. A whimper. She turned her head, blinking through the debris. And there he was. Yellow fur matted with dust. Ribs showing through his sides, eyes wild but alert. A street dog, one of the many that wandered the alleys and chased scooters. But this one, she recognized him. He used to linger near her gate, thin, always waiting. She'd toss him scraps sometimes, rice, bits of dried fish. He never came too close, never stayed long. She never learned his name, never gave him one. He was just there, a presence, a routine. A quiet little ritual between two creatures who asked nothing from each other. And now he was here, digging, scratching, whining with an urgency that bordered on panic. Tears welled in her eyes, burning through the dust. You, she whispered, voice hoarse. You found me. He pawed at the debris, pushing with all his tiny strength, nudging stones aside with his snout. When one chunk was too big, he circled, barked, whined, then came back, relentless. His paws bled, his nails cracked, but he didn't stop. For the first time since the world collapsed, she felt something deeper than fear, hope. And that's when she heard it. His bark, loud, sharp, again and again. Not the playful bark of a dog chasing birds, but something desperate, something calling, a signal. She didn't have the strength to shout, but his bark carried, over the ruins, over the silence. It echoed like a siren, cutting through the rubble's stillness, and then voices, far off, shouts, a man, then another. The dog barked louder, spun in circles, ran a few steps away, then returned, barked, again, barked, until his throat cracked. Footsteps, shovels, the crunch of boots on gravel and broken glass. Her breath hitched. Please, she whispered. Here, here. A crack of light split the darkness. Someone called out. We've got movement. Hands reached in. Dust fell in sheets. She sobbed, not from pain but from the sudden rush of air. Someone gripped her wrist. Another voice. She's alive. They pulled her free, gently, like lifting a bird from a net. She coughed, gasped, and blinked against the harsh sunlight. The first face she saw wasn't human. It was him, the yellow dog, sitting a few feet away, tail thumping softly in the dirt, tongue hanging out, watching, waiting, like he'd just finished a chore. The rescuers wrapped her in a blanket, asked if she was alone. She nodded, then looked toward the dog. Him too, she whispered. He's with me. They looked at the dog. He didn't flinch, just walked over, settled at her side, pressed his head against her thigh. She stroked his dusty ears with her only good hand. Thar, she said, suddenly. That's his name now. The word formed in her mouth like it had always been there. It means brave. The rescuers smiled. One of them said, we'll bring him too. And in that moment, wrapped in a dusty blanket, blood on her shirt, ribs screaming with every breath, Da Kayin realized she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't just a survivor pulled from the wreckage. She was chosen, saved, not by luck, not by fate, but by a dog no one owned. And if you believe kindness doesn't echo back when you need it most, then maybe you've never looked into the eyes of a creature who remembers every crumb you gave, every moment you paused to care. He didn't forget her, and because of that, she lived. If this part of the story moved you, if you felt something stir in your chest when Thar barked for help, or when light finally broke through the rubble, let us know. Tap the like button, leave a comment for Da Kayin and Thar, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of their journey. Because this is just the beginning, and what comes next will stay with you long after the final word. At the shelter, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a nervous heartbeat. The air was thick with smoke and whispers. People cried. People prayed. Some sat in silence, clinging to each other, their eyes staring at the floor like if they looked up, they'd fall apart. But Da Kayin, she just held on to Thar. They had wrapped her ribs tightly, slung her arm in a makeshift cloth sling. Her head throbbed. Her body felt like a shattered cup hastily glued together. But the only thing she truly felt, really felt, was the soft warmth of Thar curled up against her hip, his head rising and falling with each breath. Someone handed her a bowl of rice porridge. She couldn't hold the spoon steady, so they helped. She winced with every bite, but she ate. Because of him, because this strange, dusty dog with yellow fur had clawed her back from death. She wouldn't let that miracle be wasted. That night, the shelter was filled with muffled sobs and the creaking of cots. But Thar never left her side. Every time she stirred, he shifted closer, his nose touching her good hand, his breath grounding her like an anchor. Every noise outside made him perk up, ears twitching, muscles tensed. He was guarding her, still, even now. And when she finally closed her eyes, slipping into a sleep lined with pain and strange dreams, he didn't sleep at all. He watched. She woke in a cold sweat. It was still dark, but she wasn't alone. A child across the shelter screamed in her sleep. Someone whispered a prayer in the corner. A baby cried. But in the quiet, beneath it all, she felt the same thing she had under the rubble, dread. Because when you survive something like that, it doesn't let you go. The shaking stops, but the echoes stay. The silence is never just silence. It's a trap. It's the space between one life ending and the next, not quite beginning. And she didn't know where she belonged anymore. She pressed her hand against Thar's back. His ears flicked. She whispered, "You're still here." He licked her palm once, just once, like a confirmation, then tucked his head under her arm, trusting her even when the world hadn't given him a reason to. And that's when the memories came back, not in a rush, but in flickers. The weight, the dust, the picture on the fridge, her granddaughter's voice, the radio that used to hum love songs while she cleaned, the last thing she saw before the world went black. That blue tea kettle knocked sideways, the flames licking the wall, the scream that didn't make it past her lips. It all came back like a wave, and she cried, really cried. Thar whined, stood, crawled into her lap despite the awkward bandages and her sharp gasp of pain. He didn't care, he just wanted her to feel what he knew, that she wasn't buried anymore, that she had come back. Morning came like a dull bruise in the sky. The volunteers moved through the rows of mats with soft voices and two tired eyes. One of them approached her, a girl in a red cap with dust on her cheeks. "You're the woman the dog found?" she asked. Tha Kyan nodded slowly. "He hasn't left your side. People are talking about it. They say he saved you." She looked down at him. "No, he remembered me." The girl smiled. "Same thing. That afternoon they brought food for Thar. Small bowl, chicken and rice, clean water in a tin lid." He sniffed it, then looked at Da Kyan as if asking permission. She nodded. "Eat. You've earned it." He did quickly, but only once he was sure she was watching. More people came by. Some from other shelters, curious faces. A boy who asked to pet him. A woman who offered to take him home. Da Kyan tensed, her fingers curling into the blanket. But Thar didn't move toward them. He stayed close, tail gently tapping the floor. Eyes always on her. The woman shrugged. "He's loyal. He's mine," Da Kyan said. And in that moment, for the first time since the earthquake, she felt something like strength return to her voice. That night, she asked a volunteer for a pen. She had no paper, so they gave her the back of a supply list. She wrote her granddaughter's name in crooked letters. Then a message. "I am alive. Thar saved me. I am waiting." They promised they'd deliver it to the central contact tent, where survivors' names were being recorded. They asked if Thar had a name. She told them. "Thar. It means brave." They smiled again. "We'll write that too." Days passed. Her body healed, but slowly. The doctors said her ribs would take weeks. Her arm might never regain full strength, but she didn't care. Because every day Thar led her to the edge of the shelter compound, and together they watched the trucks go by. She'd point at the hills in the distance, whispering stories to him, about her granddaughter, about the dog she had as a child, about the time she cooked too much rice, and fed the rest to the street dogs. He listened. He always listened. And sometimes at night, when the shelter fell quiet and her body ached and the dread tried to crawl back in, she'd remember that moment under the rubble, the bark, the sound that brought the world back to her. She'd reach out and rest her fingers on his back and say, "You found me." And his tail would thump once, like he remembered it too. But not all nights were peaceful. On the sixth night a tremor rattled the walls of the shelter. Not strong, just enough to make the beds shake, just enough to bring screams from sleeping mouths. Da Kyan sat up so fast, she cried out in pain. Her hand gripped the edge of her cot. Her heart raced, but Thar was already standing between her and the open door, staring outward, growling. She didn't know at what. There was nothing there, but he growled anyway, low, protective. And she realized, he remembered too. That night, sleep never returned. She sat upright, hand resting on Thar's back, and waited for morning. When it came, the volunteers said the tremor hadn't done any new damage. But for those who had lived through the quake, the aftershocks were more than physical. They were ghosts, unseen, but heavy. One of the volunteers, a young man named Ko Lin, came over with news. "Your name was read on the radio," he said. "Your granddaughter, she's looking for you." Da Kyan nearly dropped her spoon. "They said she's on her way here. She's been going shelter to shelter. She said tell my FO that May doesn't forget. I'll find you." Tears came without warning. Her chest heaved. And Thar, sensing her sobs, climbed into her lap again, tail wagging cautiously. "You hear that?" she whispered into his fur. "She's coming." He licked her cheek, and for the first time since the ground split apart, she laughed. People who had seen the rescue started to ask questions. Reporters arrived with phones and cameras. "Can we talk to you?" they asked. "About the dog." She hesitated, then nodded. They asked what he did, how he found her. "Oh, what it meant." "He didn't save me because I'm special," she told them, voice steady. "He saved me because I was kind to him once. I gave him food. I saw him. That's all it took." The video spread. In a world starved for hope, Thar's story traveled far. The yellow dog who found the grandmother. They called it a miracle. A moment of light in the rubble. Some offered to adopt him. Some wanted to give him awards. But Da Kyan just shook her head. "He chose me. That's enough."
And
Thar stayed by her side through it all. When the pain flared. When the flashbacks returned. When the tremors hit, he never wavered. And if you've made it this far, if you felt the echo of that bark in your own chest, don't stop here. Show Da Kyan and Thar that their story matters. Press the like button. Leave a comment. Tell us where you were when you first heard their story. And most of all, subscribe, because the next part of their journey is coming, and what happens next will leave you breathless. The day May arrived. The sky was gray. Not the angry kind that comes with storms, but the quiet, heavy kind that feels like it's holding its breath. Da Kyan sat outside the shelter, bundled in a donated shawl that smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. Her body still ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her ribs were wrapped in tight fabric. Her sling was rough against her shoulder, but the pain was dull now. A reminder that she was still here, still breathing, still waiting. Thar lay at her feet, ears alert, eyes scanning the distance like he understood what she was waiting for. He'd been tense all morning. He hadn't eaten his full breakfast. He hadn't chased the pigeons that gathered near the tents. He just stayed close, rising to his paws every time an unfamiliar car or truck rolled past the shelter gates. His loyalty was no longer surprising, but somehow it still left her in awe. Then, just past noon, one of the volunteers approached her, panting as he jogged up the gravel path. "She's here," he said, grinning. "Your granddaughter, May. She's just down the road." Da Kyan's heart leapt, literally leapt. Her breath caught, her eyes blurred with tears before she could stop them. She reached instinctively for Thar's fur, and he stood, sensing something electric in the air. She didn't wait, didn't care how her legs protested, or how her hip flared with pain. She rose, slowly, determined, and she walked. Each step was a memory, holding May as a baby, teaching her to stir soup, hearing her laugh when the power would go out, and they'd pretend to camp in the living room. Each step brought a breath, each breath brought a sob, and then there she was, May, taller now, her hair longer, pulled back into a tight braid, her clothes dusty, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. But her eyes, the same wide almond-shaped eyes that had once stared up from a crib, locked on Da Kyan, and didn't let go. "APHO," May cried, breaking into a run. They collided, both crying, both laughing, both sinking to their knees in the dust as the world spun quietly around them. Thar hovered beside them, tail wagging furiously, barking once as if to say, "I told you she'd come." "I thought you were gone," May whispered, her face buried in her grandmother's shoulder. They said your house was flattened. I thought I was, Da Kayan said softly, stroking her granddaughter's hair. But he found me. Thar, the dog. May pulled back, eyes wide, and looked at him. Thar cocked his head, tongue lolling slightly, and stepped forward. Slowly, carefully. May held out her hand. He sniffed her fingers, then, as if he understood that she was part of his circle now, licked her palm once and sat beside them. Thank you, May said to him, voice breaking. Thank you for saving her. Thar didn't bark, didn't move, just stayed, solid, present, real. The shelter quieted. People watched. Some cried. One woman whispered, "It's like something out of a movie," but it wasn't. It was real. This was what survival looked like. Not just the pulled from the rubble miracles, but the reunions, the aftermaths, the slow stitching back together of what had been torn apart. Later May helped Da Kayen back to the tent, one arm around her waist, the other steadying the sling. Thar followed, always 2 steps behind. That night, the 3 of them curled on the cot. It was tight, cramped. May's shoulder pressed into Da Kayen's, and Thar's warm body was draped across their feet like a furry blanket. But no one complained. Not about the space, not about the pain, not about the past. They just breathed, together. In the following days, May didn't leave her grandmother's side. She helped change her bandages. She cleaned Thar's wounds, gently dabbing the pads of his paws where the nails had cracked from digging. She brought food, fetched blankets, and told stories of the chaos she'd waded through to find her. It was so hard, May said one evening, her voice trembling. So many shelters, so many names. I was scared every time someone said they hadn't seen you, and then I heard the story. The grandmother saved by a yellow dog. I just knew, and in her eyes there was something else. A spark, determination, purpose. We need to tell people, May said. Everyone. We need to show the world what this dog did. Da Kayen hesitated. He's not a showpiece. He didn't save me for praise. I know, May said. But if people hear about him, maybe they'll be kind to the dogs they see. Maybe they'll remember that love comes back. That's when the idea took root. With the help of volunteers, May filmed a short video, just her, sitting beside her grandmother, with Thar lying between them. She told the story plainly, softly, no theatrics, just truth. The video went viral. In the cities, people watched it between news of collapsed buildings and government relief efforts. Children drew pictures of Thar. A bakery in Yangon named a pastry after him. Someone offered to sculpt a small statue in his honor. But Da Kayen only smiled. He wouldn't care, she said. He just wants to be near us. And he was, always. But not everyone celebrated. One morning, a stern man in a uniform arrived at the shelter, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as a representative from a regional rescue coordination office. We've had several requests to adopt the dog, he said. Some from international groups, offers of better care, permanent shelter. No, Da Kayen said quietly but firmly. Ma'am, these are good homes. No, she said again. He is not a stray, he's family. The man pressed, but when Thar stood and placed himself between Da Kayen and the stranger, teeth barely visible, ears rigid, the man took a step back. May placed a hand on Thar's head. He stays. He saved her life. That's the only application that matters. Eventually, the man left, but the fear lingered in Da Kayen's chest, like smoke. Could someone take him? Did she have any legal right? She didn't know. But what she did know was this. She had once been buried in silence, and only one soul had clawed her back into the world. She would fight for him now, whatever it took. The shelter grew crowded. New survivors arrived every day, some injured, some shell-shocked, some just quiet. Thar seemed to sense who needed company. He'd nuzzle the hand of a crying man. He'd sit quietly beside a child who hadn't spoken since the quake. He moved like a ghost, with purpose, comforting without asking for anything in return. But he always came back to her, always slept at her side. One night, May looked at her grandmother and whispered, "He's more than a dog." "I know," Da Kayen said. He's the reason I'm still here. And that's when May decided to start a journal. A record, not just of the earthquake, or the escape, but of every small act of kindness Thar offered, every wag of the tail, every silent vigil by a cot. We're going to remember all of this, she said. We're going to make sure no one forgets what he did. And maybe you feel that too. Maybe as you listen, you're thinking of a dog you once knew, or a kindness you offered without expecting anything in return. Maybe you felt the silence after disaster, the stillness, the dread, and wished for someone to dig you out. Let this be your sign. If Thar's story has reached your heart, don't let it end here. Click the like button, leave a comment, tell us where you are, and what this story means to you, and subscribe, because the next part of this journey will reveal something you won't expect. The silence may have passed, but what's coming will shake you in a different way. Thar isn't done, and neither are we. They didn't believe her at first. Da Kyan's voice was weak, her body frail, and when she told them she knew the dog, really knew him, it sounded like grief talking, like trauma wrapping itself in meaning. But she remembered him, not just as a yellow blur on the roadside, or a hungry shadow beneath her chair. She remembered him, the way he lingered near the edge of her yard each morning, the way he tilted his head when she spoke, even when she thought he didn't understand. She remembered the day she gave him the last of her dried fish, and whispered, "This is all I have today," and how he didn't eat it right away, just stared at her, like it was enough that she shared. Now, as she sat wrapped in a donated quilt under the fading orange light of early evening, she stared into his face, and all of it came rushing back. "I know you," she whispered. Thar tilted his head, ears perked, like the sound of her voice triggered something deep in his memory too. He stepped forward, slowly, then sat before her, not on command, but like it was where he belonged. She reached out her good hand, palm open. He leaned in, resting his head in her lap. That was when May saw it, not just a bond, but a story that had been unfolding quietly in the background of their lives. "You really knew him before," she said softly, crouching beside them. "I didn't think it mattered," Da Kyan murmured. "He was just a stray. But now I see, he wasn't. He was waiting, watching, like he knew someday I'd meet him." And it hit May then, hard and deep. How many of us walk past the same faces every day, and never really see them? How many chances do we miss, to show kindness, to make eye contact, to offer even the smallest gesture of care? And what would happen if, one day, that moment of kindness is the very thing that saves us? The next morning, May found a box of old photos among the recovered rubble from their home. Most were smudged or water-stained, but a few had survived. In one, taken months before the earthquake, Da Kyan sat outside her gate, holding a steaming bowl of rice, and just behind her, barely in frame, was a yellow blur. Thar, watching. They showed the photo to a volunteer, who helped manage the shelter's social media account. He posted it with the caption, "Not a stranger, a friend. He was always there." The post exploded, thousands of shares. People commented from around the world. "I want a dog like Thar. I'll never ignore a street dog again." Kindness doesn't forget. The attention brought food donations, blankets, vet supplies. Someone even offered to sponsor Thar's care for life. But Da Kyan shook her head gently. "He already has what he needs. He has us." But not everything was praise. One afternoon, a visitor came to the shelter claiming to be Thar's original owner. He said he'd lost a yellow dog months ago. He had a blurry photo. The coloring looked similar. His tone was pushy, demanding. "I've been looking for him since last year," the man insisted. "He's mine. I can prove it." May stiffened. "Da Kyan too. He's not yours anymore," Da Kyan said. Her voice was calm, low, but like stone. "Ma'am," the man pressed, "he might have saved you, but he's my dog." May stood between them. "If he's yours, why was he eating scraps? Why was he sleeping in the dirt?" The man hesitated. Thar didn't approach him, didn't wag his tail. In fact, he stepped back, pressed himself against Da Kyan's leg. The man left shortly after, grumbling. That night, Da Kyan spoke quietly to Thar, as they curled up for sleep. "You get to choose where you belong, and you chose us." There was something else in her voice that night, not just affection, but awe, like she still couldn't quite believe it, that a creature she once pitied had risen like a ghost from the rubble and pulled her into the light. Days passed, weeks. They moved to a transition shelter with better walls, better beds. May helped coordinate relief paperwork for their family, and Thar remained a constant, a guardian, a symbol. People came to see him. Children drew him in notebooks. A young artist painted a mural on the outer wall, a golden dog in front of a crumbling house, tail raised, eyes sharp. Thar didn't care for the attention. He only cared when Da Kian was late to wake, or when May cried quietly reading the list of missing names still unrecovered. Then came the night Da Kian's fever rose. She hadn't complained, not even when her joints ached, or when the headaches started. But Thar noticed first. He wouldn't leave her side. He paced, whined, barked when she coughed too hard. May thought he was just being protective, until Da Kian collapsed trying to stand. The shelter doctor rushed in. They said it was a lung infection, one that could have turned deadly if not caught early. And Thar had caught it. "I've never seen anything like it," the doctor said, shaking his head. He knew something was wrong before any of us did. May didn't doubt it for a second. The next morning, after Da Kian was stabilized, May sat on the edge of her grandmother's cot, stroking Thar's back. "You knew," she whispered. "You saved her again." Thar didn't look up, just leaned into her hand, heavy with the exhaustion of someone who had carried too much. Later, when Da Kian woke, she turned her head and whispered, "You never left me." And Thar, as if he understood the weight of those words, laid his head gently on her chest and closed his eyes. Their bond was no longer just emotional. It was something else, something unseen, sacred. And if you've stayed with this story, if Thar's loyalty has wrapped itself around your heart the way it wrapped itself around hers, don't let that feeling go. Tap the like button, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe now, because what comes next will change everything you thought you knew about healing, about love, and about the silent power of being seen. Thar wasn't just a dog who remembered a kindness. He was a guardian, a witness, a friend. And in the quiet corners of this broken world, sometimes that's the only miracle we need. In the weeks that followed Da Kian's collapse, the shelter changed, not in structure, but in spirit. There was a quiet reverence now, especially around Thar. The volunteers began to lower their voices when they passed him, as if they were in the presence of something more than a dog. He wasn't just a symbol anymore. He was real, living, breathing, watching. And to those who'd seen what he had done, not once, but twice, he was something like sacred. But Thar didn't care about admiration. He didn't care about the mural, or the camera crews that occasionally drifted in from the cities to capture the miracle. He only cared about two things: that Da Kian was breathing, and that she was within reach. On a pale Tuesday morning, she was strong enough to sit on the shaded bench near the fence line. May wrapped her in a shawl and handed her a warm bowl of soup. Thar curled at her feet as always, but this time his head was up, eyes darting, watching, waiting. "Something's wrong," Da Kian said softly, after a long sip. May turned, worried. "What do you mean? Are you cold?" "No, not me. Him." She looked down. Thar's ears were forward, his body stiff. He was growling, low, barely audible, but unmistakable. That's when the first voice called out. It wasn't from the road or the gate. It was from behind the back fence. A boy, then another, shouting, laughing. The kind of laughter that doesn't hold joy, only malice. Thar was on his feet in an instant, standing between the sound and Da Kian. 3 boys appeared on the hill above the shelter. Teenagers. One of them picked up a rock. Another one had a slingshot. "Dogs don't belong here," one of them shouted. The volunteers rushed toward the fence, but it was too late. The rock flew. Thar didn't run. He didn't flinch. He stood his ground. The rock struck him just behind the shoulder. Da Kian screamed. Thar yelped once, staggered back, but didn't fall. He turned, not to run, but to stand taller, placing himself directly in front of her. Teeth bared now, growl deeper. The boys ran when the volunteers reached the gate. May was already at Thar's side, tears in her eyes, hands trembling as she checked his fur for blood. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would they do this?" Da Kyan's face was stone. "Because not everyone sees what matters." Thar licked her hand as if to say, "I'm okay," but he limped the rest of the day. The shelter doctor examined him. "No break, bruised muscle. He'll recover," they said. "But he's going to need rest." Da Kyan sat beside him all night, her hand resting gently along his ribs, whispering prayers, not just for healing, but for protection. "You saved me, twice, and I couldn't stop a stone," she murmured. He looked up at her with eyes that held no blame, only patience, only love. The next day, May asked for permission to speak to the other shelters. She stood up in front of 100 people with a photo of Thar, and a voice that didn't waver. "This dog didn't ask to be a hero," she said. "He didn't know his story would spread. He didn't do it for fame or reward. He saved my grandmother. He warned us when she was sick. And when a rock flew, he didn't run. He stayed between danger and someone he loved." Her voice cracked. "If that doesn't deserve protection, I don't know what does." The room fell quiet. That afternoon, the shelter directors created a rule. No animals would be turned away. Any dog that helped rescue a survivor would be given permanent shelter access. No exceptions. And Thar got his own corner. A padded mat, a small metal food dish painted with his name, and a hand-stitched blanket with yellow paw prints embroidered by a child whose father had been pulled from a collapsed grocery store. The child had written a note, "For the dog who brings people back." But Thar didn't stay in that corner for long. As soon as his limp began to fade, he resumed his quiet rounds. He visited the old woman with memory loss, laying beside her until her tears stopped. He walked the little boy from Tent 14 to the hand-washing station every morning without being asked. He even joined May when she stood by the ruins of their home, letting her cry without moving away. And each time someone asked if they could take a picture, Da Kyan said yes. "Let them see him," she said. "Let the world remember what goodness looks like." One morning, a familiar barking pierced the still air, sharp, urgent, panicked. Da Kyan sat up from her cot. "Thar," she whispered. He was near the water tanks, running in circles, barking at the ground. A volunteer sprinted over. There, hidden just behind a loose board, was a child, barely 5, covered in dirt, crying silently. They had been missing for hours. The crowd gathered again. The whispers spread. "He found another one." Da Kyan cried quietly, into her hands. "It wasn't luck," she said. "He's not just remembering, he's looking." That night, May curled beside her grandmother and whispered, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think he was meant for this. I think he was born with a mission." Da Kyan smiled softly. "Maybe. Or maybe love just grows wherever it's planted." Thar lifted his head and rested it gently on both of their legs. And if you've been following this story, if Thar's courage is still echoing in your heart, then this is your moment to act. Click like if you believe animals can be heroes. Leave a comment if someone once stood between you and the darkness, and make sure to subscribe, because Thar's story isn't finished. He's not just the dog who saved one life. He's the dog who doesn't stop saving. The story continues, so don't look away. The light came through the cracks first, just a blade of gold in the sea of shadow. Da Kyan remembered that moment more vividly than anything else. Not the earthquake's roar, not even the rescue. No, what stayed with her was the sliver of light breaking through the wreckage, cutting across her bruised face like a promise. "You are not forgotten." And when the rubble was lifted, when hands reached in and voices called her name, she didn't cry because she was saved. She cried because the first thing she saw wasn't the sky, it was him. Now, weeks later, as she stood at the threshold of the new emergency shelter, leaning heavily on her cane, that memory returned. Thar was ahead of her, his tail wagging slow, steady, guiding her like a shadow with a heartbeat. The volunteers had moved them to a sturdier facility, one with cots instead of mats and privacy dividers, instead of plastic tarps. May walked beside them, carrying the small cloth bag that held all their possessions. Cracked photograph, 3 sets of clothes, and the now famous drawing from Da Keen's fridge, the one with the crooked sun, and the 3-legged dog. But the most important thing they carried couldn't be packed. Thar padded inside first. The air smelled different here. Less of smoke, more of medicine and wet concrete. Survivors moved like ghosts, slow and uncertain, their faces pale with stories they didn't know how to tell. But when Thar entered, everything shifted. Heads turned, eyes lit up. "That's him," someone whispered. "That's the dog from the videos." A woman stood and pressed her hands together, as if in prayer. "He found my brother's child," she said softly, 2 days ago, buried under a market stall. People didn't rush Thar. They didn't swarm him or reach out as they might with a celebrity. Instead, they gave him space. They watched him with the same reverence they might offer a monk or a holy statue. It wasn't fame, it was respect. Da Keen eased herself down onto her new cot. May arranged the blanket, fluffed the pillow, and crouched to check her feet for swelling. Thar sat close, his body half curled around her like a living wall. "You sure you're warm enough?" May asked. "I am," Da Keen replied. "He keeps me warm." May smiled, but it was a tired smile, the kind that comes from holding too much grief in too small a body. She had taken on so much since the quake, finding her grandmother, managing relief paperwork, speaking to journalists. But she never once complained. Her strength reminded Da Keen of the daughter she'd lost years ago, the one May barely remembered. And now, watching her granddaughter kneel beside this street-born miracle of a dog, Da Keen felt something rare: peace. The following morning, a knock came at the shelter gate. It was early, too early for deliveries or volunteer shifts. Thar was already up. He growled softly and walked toward the sound. Outside stood a man in a dusty suit, holding a clipboard and a small camera. He wore the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "I'm here to do a feature for international syndication," he said. "A documentary, actually, about survivors, and miracles, and dogs." May's shoulders tensed. "We've already told our story." Yes, he said quickly. "But not like this. I have sponsors, a distribution deal. We could fly you to Yangon, maybe even Bangkok. Think of the reach." Da Keen looked up, her voice like worn silk. "And what does Thar get?" The man blinked. "Excuse me, what does he get?" "You want his face, his story, his miracle. What do you give him in return?" The man stammered, but Thar stepped forward then, placing himself squarely between the stranger and Da Keen, his stance calm but unmistakably firm. "I think he's answered for us," May said, and closed the door. Later that day, Da Keen sat beside Thar on the edge of the compound, where a fallen banyan tree now served as a bench. The wind was soft, the air clearer than it had been in weeks. "You don't care about being known," she whispered into his fur. "You just care about being near." Thar licked her knuckles. She looked at May. "When I was buried, I didn't think of God or angels. I didn't pray for a miracle. I thought about my granddaughter and a dog I once fed." "That dog saved you," May said quietly. "No," Da Keen replied. "That memory saved me. That moment, that thread I didn't know was still tied to the world." May said nothing. She just leaned her head against her grandmother's shoulder, and Thar lay down across both their feet, anchoring them to the earth. The next day, the director of the shelter announced a plan. They would hold a recognition ceremony for the volunteers, and for the animals who had helped in rescues. Most had been adopted. A few, like Thar, remained at the shelter. A local craftsman carved medallions from driftwood and inscribed each with the word "thank you" in Burmese script. When they called Thar's name, Da Keen struggled to her feet. She walked with her cane, each step slow but proud. May held her arm. Thar stood beside them, head high, chest out. The crowd applauded, but Thar didn't respond to the noise. He only turned to look at Da Keen, as if to say, "Are you okay?" She smiled and whispered, "I am now." After the ceremony, a girl no more than 10 approached with a notebook. "Can I draw him?" she asked. Da Keen nodded. The child sat cross-legged on the ground, tongue sticking out as she concentrated. After 20 minutes, she held up the page. It was rough, a yellow dog with large eyes and a crooked smile. But at the bottom, in neat handwriting, she'd written, "You didn't fly, but you saved." Da Keen's breath caught. She looked down at Thar, resting now, eyes half closed. "You didn't fly," she murmured, "but you lifted me. And if that truth has touched you, if you've been following this journey, and felt something shift deep inside, don't leave it there. Like this video. Leave a comment for Thar. Tell us what kindness you remember. What moment pulled you back into the light? And subscribe now, because the next part of Thar's story holds something no one sees coming. A new rescue, a new danger, and a truth that will shake everything we thought we knew about loyalty. This is not just survival anymore. This is transformation. The day the rains came, the shelter changed again. What was once brittle heat gave way to a slow, steady downpour that turned dust to mud, ash to earth, and silence into a rhythm that echoed like memory. Water pooled in the corners of the compound, dripping from the tarpaulin edges with soft, sorrowful taps. For most, the rain was a nuisance. For Da Keen, it was a baptism. She sat in a plastic chair under a cracked umbrella, her shawl draped across her lap, breathing in the scent of wet soil and soot. Everything felt slower when it rained, slower and sadder. But Thar was there, always, pressed against her feet, curled like a comma that paused her grief. The rain didn't bother him. If anything, he seemed comforted by it, as if the world was finally crying the tears he had been carrying in silence. Volunteers rushed about, securing crates, covering supplies, checking drainage lines to keep the flood from creeping under the cots. May joined them, sleeves rolled, hair plastered to her neck, voice rising above the storm as she called out names and offered help. She was tireless, but Thar, he didn't move, not when the thunder rolled, not when lightning cracked like a warning across the darkened sky. He stayed, watching Da Keen, listening to her shallow breaths, counting each one like a vow. When the rain finally eased to a whisper, May returned to her grandmother, soaked to the skin but smiling. "Flood's under control," she said, kneeling beside her. "We're safe." Da Keen looked down at Thar. "Because of him." May nodded. "Always." That night, the shelter was quiet. Wet clothes hung from wires, food was served cold, and no one spoke much. Da Keen couldn't sleep. Her bones ached in the damp air. She watched the shadowy ceiling and listened to Thar's breathing, steady, reassuring. And then he stirred. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just stood, ears twitching, nose lifted, body stiff. Da Keen sat up slowly. "What is it?" Thar walked to the door flap, looked back, waited. She hesitated, then rose. The compound was still. Rain had stopped. Only puddles reflected the dim light of the lanterns strung along the walkways. She stepped out, cane in hand, wrapped tight in her shawl. Thar padded beside her, silent, urgent. He led her past the sleeping volunteers, past the food crates toward the outer fence. And there, huddled in the shadows of the banyan tree, was a boy, alone, shivering, thin as a whisper. He looked up when he heard her approach, eyes wide and frightened, hands trembling. Da Keen knelt, ignoring the fire in her knees. "Where's your family?" He didn't answer, just stared. Thar stepped forward, sniffed the boy's arm, then sat. The boy blinked. Then, as if the dog's presence gave him permission, he whispered, "Gone." May came running minutes later, alerted by a volunteer who had seen Da Keen disappear. She knelt beside them, wrapping the boy in her jacket. He was 10. Maybe younger. He hadn't spoken since the quake, had wandered for days. No one knew how he got past the gates, but Thar found him. Again, the shelter welcomed the boy, bathed him, fed him, sat him beside Thar, who didn't move an inch when the child leaned against his side and fell asleep. Later, when the story spread through the compound, someone said, "That dog doesn't rest." And Da Keen, watching from her cot, whispered, "Because grief never does." Days passed. The boy, named Nahet, began to speak, first in fragments, then full sentences, always with Thar beside him. "He keeps the bad dreams away," he told May one morning. Does he talk to you? She asked gently. He nodded. Not with words, with staying. That day, a woman arrived at the shelter searching for a missing child. She was bruised, barefoot, eyes wild from days of fear. When Nahad saw her, he screamed, "Amma!" They collided in the mud, sobbing. She clung to him like she was trying to pull him back into her body. And Thar stood back, watching. Tail still, eyes soft. May turned to Da Keen. "That's the third child he's led us to." She nodded. "He sees what others miss, feels what others can't." And now, the volunteers began to follow him. Not direct him, follow. When Thar stood and stared toward the broken fence line, someone followed. When he barked at a crate no one had opened, they checked, and found a kitten huddled inside. Word spread. Again, reporters returned. Donations surged. Someone made a video montage of Thar with soft piano music and posted it online. It reached 1 million views in 3 days. People sent in drawings, donations, letters. But the fame didn't change anything for him. He still slept beside Da Keen, still woke when she stirred, still guarded her like she was the only truth in a world full of noise. One night May whispered, "He's not just saving lives, he's rebuilding souls." Da Keen reached down and touched the patch of fur just above his shoulder. "He saved mine first." Then came the visit from the government official. She wore a navy blazer, her heels sinking into the shelter's soft earth. She carried forms. Her assistant carried a camera. "We'd like to make Thar a national rescue animal," she said, "with honors, travel, appearances." "No," Da Keen said before she could finish. The woman blinked. "Pardon, he's not yours to parade. We could raise awareness, funds. He could help thousands." "He already is," May said sharply, quietly, without cameras. The woman didn't argue, but her smile dimmed. "We'll be back. This story belongs to the people." May shook her head. "No, it belongs to him." That night, as rain returned and thunder whispered over the mountains, Da Keen stroked Thar's fur and said, "You don't owe the world anything. You gave it back to me. That's enough. If you're still here, if Thar's quiet bravery has left something heavy in your chest, then carry it with you. Don't forget. Click like to honor every silent act of love. Leave a comment to share what you believe a hero looks like. And subscribe now, because Thar's journey isn't over. In the next chapter, he faces a choice that will test everything he's given, and everything he still has left to give. What does loyalty look like? It looks like this. The story had begun to ripple beyond the village, beyond the shelter, beyond Myanmar's borders. First it was whispers, then headlines, then hashtags. The yellow dog who saved the grandmother. The miracle mongrel of Myanmar. People as far away as Norway and Brazil were talking about Thar. Some donated, some prayed, others sent hand-stitched collars and homemade cards. There was even a video of schoolchildren in Japan standing in a line, each holding a paw print cutout, reciting in broken Burmese, "Thank you, Thar." But for Da Kien, none of that mattered. Not the trending posts, not the reporters, not the awards being offered from ministries she couldn't name. What mattered was that Thar was still with her, that every morning when her bones felt like stone, he nudged her awake, that every time her mind wandered back into the rubble, he brought her back with a gentle paw on her thigh, or a soft huff in her lap, and he was always watching, always sensing, always staying. By now, even the newest volunteers at the shelter knew not to question it. When Thar suddenly stood and began pacing, it didn't mean he needed food or a walk. It meant something, or someone needed him. One afternoon, Thar startled from sleep, his body rigid. Without hesitation, he bolted toward the back fence. Da Kien had never seen him move that fast, not even during the quake. "Thar!" May shouted, already sprinting after him. Da Kien rose, leaning heavily on her cane, eyes sharp despite the pain in her legs. "What is it?" she asked a volunteer. "I don't know. He just took off." They found him near the rear edge of the shelter, nose pressed to the soil, barking, not frantically, but rhythmically. It was that bark, the one Da Qian would never forget. The bark that once tore through concrete and brought her back from the dead. The volunteers began to dig. At first, nothing, just damp earth. Then a shoe, then a buried piece of blanket, then a cry. A woman, half conscious, pinned beneath what had once been a solar panel installation that collapsed in the rain. No one had known she was missing yet. She hadn't even been reported. She was alive. And once again, Thar had found her. The moment went viral. Again. Phones filmed as the woman was lifted from the ground. As Thar stood at a distance, tail still, eyes locked on her face, like he'd known her forever. Later, as Da Qian stroked his fur beside the fire barrels that kept the chill at bay, she whispered, "You don't just find people. You hear them, through everything." May sat beside her, pulling a blanket tighter around her grandmother's shoulders. "He's a story people need right now," she said. "Something unbroken in a world full of cracks." Da Qian nodded. "But the world's attention is loud. It might scare him. Then we'll protect him," May said, "the way he protected us." A week later, journalists came with bigger cameras. A famous animal rights activist from Europe arrived, requesting an audience with the hero dog. She wanted to adopt him, fly him out of the country, give him the life he deserves. Da Qian listened quietly, then stood. "His life is here," she said. "Not in a mansion, not behind glass. Here, with the broken, the grieving, the rebuilding." The activist blinked. "But, he's famous. He could do more. He already has," May snapped. "And if you really want to honor him, don't take him away from what he loves. Learn from him. Stay, help." The activist left, bewildered, but something shifted that day. Thar's story stopped being about sensationalism. It became about service. Volunteers began calling him the silent doctor. Whenever someone cried, he was there. When a man collapsed from the weight of too much loss, Thar sat beside him for hours, not moving until the tears stopped. One boy, who hadn't spoken since his father's body was pulled from the rubble, began whispering into Thar's ear. One word, then another, then full sentences. No one knows what he said. But when his mother saw him laughing softly into the dog's fur, she broke into tears. People came to see Thar, but they left changed. The staff posted a sign near the gate. "He doesn't belong to us, but we belong to him." And still, Thar remained unchanged. He didn't chase attention. He didn't care for cameras. He cared only when someone was hurting. One night Da Qian awoke gasping, her chest tight, her breath shallow. Thar was already beside her, nudging her ribs, licking her palm. May flew to her side, calling for the shelter nurse. It was a flare-up. Her lungs, scarred from the collapse, were inflamed from the dampness. As she was stabilized, oxygen mask over her mouth, Thar curled beside her cot, refusing to move. The nurse whispered, "If you ask me, it wasn't the medicine that kept her breathing tonight. It was him." Da Qian squeezed May's hand. "You protect him when I'm gone," she said softly. May cried, "Don't say that." But Da Qian's voice didn't waver. "This world doesn't deserve him, but it needs him." By morning she had stabilized again. Thar didn't leave her side once. The days that followed were quiet, reflective. The rain eased, birds returned. Grass began to push through the cracks in the shelter's walkways, and the community shifted. People spoke to each other differently, more gently. They sat in silence beside strangers. They shared their pain without shame. Because if a dog could give that kind of love without ever saying a word, what excuse did any of them have? A woman who lost her husband began feeding stray dogs each morning outside the shelter gates. She called it Thar's hour. Children followed her. Some brought drawings. Others brought biscuits. Every day at sunrise, they'd sit in a circle and just wait. Sometimes Thar joined them. Sometimes he didn't. But it didn't matter. The act was enough. The story reached new heights when a local teacher started an education program named the Thar Project, teaching children about compassion, resilience, and quiet courage. And still, Thar stayed beside Da Qian. One morning she whispered into his fur, "They say you're a miracle." He blinked slowly, nudging her chin. "You're not," she said. "You're more than that. Miracles disappear. But you remain. And if you've made it to this point in the story, if your heart has held its breath with every rescue, if you've felt that quiet power in Thar's stillness, in his eyes, in his simple act of staying, then this is your moment. Like this video. Comment with your own story of love, of loss, of the dog that never left you. And please subscribe, because the final chapters of Thar's journey are coming, and they carry truths we all need to hear. He didn't save lives because he was trained. He didn't change the world because he meant to. He just showed up when no one else did. That's love. That's courage. That's Thar. Grief is a room with no windows. Dakian had lived in that room long before the earthquake ever touched her, the death of her husband, the silence after her daughter's passing, the ache of watching friends fade away one by one as the years rolled forward without mercy. But what made the room bearable, what cracked a single window into that darkness, was not something expected. It was a yellow street dog with watchful eyes and bleeding paws who once dug through death itself to find her heartbeat again. And now every day she opened her eyes and found Thar lying beside her. The light from that window grew a little wider. Her ribs were healing, slowly. Her shoulders still ached, but the doctors said she'd regain most of its function. The deeper wounds, though, the kind grief leaves in the soul, those took longer. But Thar never rushed her. He simply stayed. When her thoughts slipped into the wreckage, when she couldn't eat, when she'd wake up in a panic after a dream of being buried alive, he would press his body against hers until her breathing slowed, until the walls of that room with no windows cracked open once more. And she wasn't the only one. The shelter had changed, not just because it was sturdier or better funded now, but because something about Thar shifted the atmosphere. It became a place of after loss, after fear, after despair. But instead of ending there, it also became a place of again, to breathe again, to hope again, to smile again. The volunteers started calling it the house Thar built, not because he laid bricks, but because everywhere he stepped, something grew. One woman, formerly silent since losing her entire family in the quake, began crafting small woven toys for the children. She said it helped keep her mind from drifting. She gave the first one to Thar, a tiny yarn mouse with lopsided ears. He carried it in his mouth for 2 days straight and laid it on Dakian's lap like a sacred offering. Another man, who once yelled in grief every night until his throat bled, began drawing, pages and pages, most of them of Thar, but also of trees, hands healing. "He makes things quiet," the man said once, as if stunned by his own stillness. "Not empty, just quiet." And every day Thar walked the compound, like it was his heart made visible. He'd stop to let children pet him. He'd sit beside the sick, curl up beside the tired, lay his head on the laps of the broken. He never asked for food, never barked for attention. He was simply present. May began documenting it all. She filled notebooks with what she called Thar's journal, pages of stories from survivors, sketches, quotes, a timeline of every person he helped locate, every life he touched. It was raw, honest, filled with typos and smudges from rain and tears. But it was beautiful, and Dakian watched it all from her chair near the banyan tree. Still weak, still healing, but no longer grieving alone. Her face was leaner, sharper, her hands more weathered, but her eyes were alive. Because now, when she looked at the world, she saw it through Thar's eyes. One afternoon she stood without help, for the first time in weeks. She leaned on her cane, took a breath, and whispered to May, "I'd like to walk." May's eyes brimmed. "I'll walk with you." "No," Dakian said gently. "He will." And so Thar walked at her side, slow, deliberate, matching her steps. They moved through the shelter like a pair of old soldiers. Survivors bowed their heads. Children stepped back to watch. No one spoke. It was as if the world held its breath to witness what love looked like when it endured. She walked all the way to the far end of the compound, where the rubble of the original shelter had been pushed into a memorial mound. She stood before it, breathing hard, tears tracking silently down her face. Then she knelt, slowly, painfully, pressed her fingers into the soil, and whispered, "Thank you," to the rubble, to the earth, to the silence that had once threatened to end her, but hadn't. And then she turned to Thar and said, "Because of you, I get to begin again." He pressed his nose to her shoulder, tail brushing against the dirt. It was more than a moment. It was a resurrection. The next day May printed Thar's journal. She stapled pages, made copies, handed them out. A traveling journalist saw it and asked to publish excerpts. They appeared in newspapers across the region. Teachers used it to discuss empathy. Rescue workers passed it around like scripture. And yet, Thar remained the same, humble, quiet, loyal. One morning as Da Kien sat beside the rain barrel watching May scrub clothes, a young boy approached. He held out a plastic cup filled with small coins. "What's this?" May asked. "For Thar," the boy said shyly, "so he can buy a toy." May crouched, smiling. "You think he wants a toy?" The boy nodded. "All heroes deserve something soft." They bought him a squeaky plush, shaped like a banana. Thar carried it for days, sleeping with it in his paws, only dropping it to nudge Da Kien when she needed reminding that she wasn't alone. More toys followed, more gifts, but Thar gave them away, one by one. Always to someone sad, always to someone silent. And that's when May realized Thar had changed her too. She'd arrived at the shelter a granddaughter, desperate to find her a foe. But now she was a writer, a volunteer, a caretaker, a chronicler of something bigger than any tragedy. She told Da Kien one evening, "I used to think I needed to leave this place, start over somewhere else. And now, I don't want to leave him. I want to stay and build what he started." Da Kien smiled. "Then you've finally found your calling." That night, the shelter buzzed with quiet celebration. A baby was born, healthy, crying, full of life. The first birth since the earthquake. And as they wrapped the newborn in a soft towel, the mother looked down and gasped. "He looks right at Thar," she said. Thar was watching from a distance. Not moving, not wagging, just watching. The mother smiled. "He's our guardian." The room agreed. A new life had entered a broken world, and the first thing it saw was hope. If you're still with us, if you've walked through the rubble, the rain and the healing, then you've seen what Thar truly is. Not just a rescue dog, not just a miracle, but a mirror showing us what we're all capable of when we stay instead of run, when we listen instead of speak, when we love even if the world doesn't give us a reason to. So don't let the story stop here. Like this video, leave a comment for Thar and the lives he's touched. Share your own stories of the pets who saved you, of the strangers who stayed when no one else did. And subscribe, because the final chapter is coming. A farewell, a truth, and a lesson you'll carry long after the screen fades to black. He didn't just save lives, he rebuilt them. The hardest part of healing isn't the pain. It's the fear that when the world starts moving again, the thing that saved you might not come with you. That one day you'll open your eyes, and the one constant in your chaos, the one heartbeat that stayed, will be gone. Da Kien knew this fear. She carried it quietly, tucked behind her smiles, beneath her shawl, folded into every touch she gave Thar. Because Thar wasn't just the dog who saved her life. He was her life now. The shelter had become something sacred, no longer just a place for recovery, but a haven for transformation. People no longer whispered about loss. They shared stories of beginnings. May's Thar journal was now officially printed in 3 languages. A small team of educators used it in classrooms to teach empathy and emotional resilience. Pictures of Thar hung on the compound walls, painted by children who had once been too afraid to speak. And every morning, without fail, he still made his rounds, checking on the sick, the grieving, the ones who sat too long staring at the ground. But something was changing. Thar was older now. Not in years, he was still young by most counts, but in the kind of way that love and labor wear on the soul. He slept more deeply, walked a little slower. His once relentless energy had softened into something quieter, more deliberate. Not weakness, wisdom. The kind that comes from having seen too much, given too much, carried too much. And everyone noticed. He's tired, one of the nurses whispered. He's earned it, said another. Even the children stopped trying to play chase. Instead, they'd lie beside him, fingers brushing his back as they spoke softly into his ears. They didn't need him to run anymore. They just needed him there. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ruined hills, May found her grandmother sitting alone near the banyan tree, a bundle wrapped in her lap. It was the drawing from the fridge, the one that had somehow survived the quake, crumpled, smudged, barely holding together. Still have it, May said, kneeling beside her. Always, Doc Ian replied. She drew this for me, years ago, before the world fell apart. Thar walked over slowly and sat at their feet, his eyes closed as he rested his head on Doc Ian's toes, exhaling deeply. And now, she whispered, I have someone else who chose me. May nodded. You know, we never asked why he came to your house that day. Why he dug. I don't think he chose to, Doc Ian said quietly. I think love just remembers where it's been welcomed. She looked at her granddaughter. And he remembered me. The next day, a woman from the capital arrived. She didn't wear heels or hold a clipboard. She wasn't there for a press release. She came with mud on her shoes and eyes that had seen war zones and flood zones and fires. She was part of an animal rescue initiative, and she had one simple request. I'd like to start a sanctuary, she said, for dogs like Thar, for the ones no one sees until it's too late. But I want him to be its symbol, the heart of it. May was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Only if he stays with us. Always, the woman said. This won't take him away from you. This will give his story a home. They called it the house Thar chose. It was built on the edge of the village, where the rice fields met the foothills. Simple structures, clean space, open gates, and one painted mural on the entrance. Thar lying beside the crumbled home he once dug through, eyes steady, tongue curled, tail relaxed. People came not to visit a celebrity, but to remember the quake, the silence, the miracle that didn't wear a cape, didn't bark for attention, didn't need a leash to lead. Doc Ian made the walk to the sanctuary once a week, with her cane, with May at her side, with Thar padding quietly along the trail, now well worn from visitors and children and stories. One morning she reached the gate and paused. Thar stopped too. You ready? She asked. He looked at her, then stepped forward. It was the last time he let her. Weeks later he grew ill, slowly, gently, as if even his body knew it had to go quietly, with grace. The vet came often, gave medicine, offered hope, but everyone knew, everyone felt it. One night when the wind smelled like jasmine and the stars hung low over the hills, Doc Ian stayed up beside him. He lay on a soft mat, head on her lap, his banana plush between his paws. May sat close, holding a lantern, tears falling silently into the dirt. Doc Ian stroked his ears. You don't have to stay for me, she whispered. You've done more than I ever deserved. He blinked, once, then closed his eyes. He passed before sunrise. There was no announcement, only a ripple of silence across the shelter. Children sat still. Volunteers wept. The old man who hadn't spoken since the quake whispered, Good boy. They buried him beneath the banyan tree, wrapped in a white cloth. The plush banana laid beside him. Doc Ian placed the crumpled drawing at his feet. He was never just a dog, she said, voice shaking. He was a reason. No speeches, no ceremony, just presence. Everyone stayed. That night a small dog wandered into the shelter gates, thin, dusty, unmarked. He curled up beside the banyan tree, and stayed. And just like that, the story began again. Because love doesn't end, it echoes. And now, if you've made it to this final moment, if your heart is aching the way ours is, if you've ever been saved by someone who had nothing to give but everything inside them, then let this be the way you honor Thar. Click like. Leave a comment for Doc Ian, for May, for every soul Thar stayed for. Share this story, so someone else might remember that even in a world shaken to its knees, the quietest love can rebuild everything. And subscribe because more stories like this are waiting. More dogs. More survivors. More moments that remind us what it means to be seen, to be chosen, to be saved. He was never ours, but we were his. Forever.